Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Down Syndrome Center podcast. As always, I'm your host, Dr. Kishore Volodi. Today's topic is going to be one that I don't think we've ever actually e- just explicitly discussed before on the topic. The topic will be on speech clarity today, and we're joined by Jennifer Gray, who's a speech language pathologist, and she specializes in speech, language, and feeding issues as they come about in people with Down syndrome. But today, our focus is going to be on speech clarity. But before we get too far into the podcast, I'm going to ask you, Jennifer, if you don't mind, share a little bit about who you are, what you do, and what draws you to work with this population.
Oh boy. I'm a speech language pathologist and I'm in the
Yeah.
Denver area. So, I have a lot of kind of access to a lot of the things going on in the Down syndrome world, which is kind of nice. And I have specialized in speech and language for people with Down syndrome for about 20 years now, starting in pediatrics. And then obviously at this point, all my babies are grown up. And so um, I see only people with Down syndrome. I grew my practice around that a little bit because it worked and it grew.
Hmm.
And now I do a lot of teaching so that we can kind of get more information out to people because really speech and language is the one area that is just completely lacking, at least from my profession standpoint. We haven't done
Yeah.
much. Really,
Hmm.
it's not coming from speech language pathologists.
Okay.
And so some of the success that I've had doing the techniques that I've developed, um, I want to start sharing that with therapists so
Yeah.
therapists know what they're doing, parents also. And I'm kind of parent taught.
Hmm.
I think I'm one of the few people that came to Down syndrome without knowing someone with Down syndrome first. And so that makes me kind of unique, I think.
Yeah.
Most people have a personal tie. But I mean, it's personal to me now because of how I
Yes.
came to it was, oh, okay, you want this for your child. So I would just ask parents, what do you
Yeah.
want?
Yeah.
And I was young enough that that's just what I did because I didn't really know anything.
Yeah.
I came from feeding, so I knew how the mouth and the muscles and all of that worked, and we knew, that that's obviously part of the reason why speech is so tough.
Hmm.
But in just doing that and asking questions and kind of having to be self-taught because there was no one to really learn from,
Yeah.
um, I've developed something that just kind of accidentally worked.
Yeah.
And as it started working more and more, I started doing more and more, tweaking things more and more, looking for other things I could bring in to solve some of the questions I had about speech and language for this population because it's so complex.
Yeah.
It almost makes your mind kind of snowball into, wow, now I know why no one's really paying much attention because where do you focus? And
Yeah.
so what I've tried to do is develop things that allow me to deal with that complexity in simple ways
Hmm.
through the way that we apply therapies. And so I
Yeah.
can talk a little bit about some specific therapies in addition to just kind of the theory of why we might want to keep working on speech clarity and not
Yeah.
abandon it.
I mean, I think that what I found, and I think in speaking with other folks who are speech therapists and speech language pathologists, is that speech clarity is automatically assumed to reflect somebody's intellectual abilities. And so, for our friends with Down syndrome, where speech clarity can often be a real challenge for them, even as they get older, I think a lot of times we find our friends getting thought to be less intelligent than what they really are. And I feel like this is such an important topic for that reason. As you think about our friends with Down syndrome and you think about some of the speech difficulties that we can see, what are some of the common issues that you run into in your practice?
I'm glad you said that,
Yeah.
um, because it can happen instantly. So being able to say your own name when someone says, hello, how are you?
Uh-huh.
It's really, really shocking if you just look at that. I do this at conferences sometimes, especially if I have students. They will point to their name tag, they will look up at mom, or they will say it, and you don't know what it is, right? And so
Uh,
immediately, even just starting from that one name, if I have somebody that I'm working with that's older, I'll start right there
yeah.
because of exactly what you said. Oh, if I can't understand how he said his own name,
Hmm.
he's really not
Hmm.
very high functioning. And I don't know if I
Hmm.
want to hire him or talk to him
Hmm.
more or
Hmm.
what have you. And I think that leads even in the professions to believing that this is too hard for them,
Yeah.
and that we should either abandon it or replace it. And I
Yeah.
think that that's kind of been what my field has done because they don't really know much about Down syndrome. So,
Yeah.
um, yes, that's kind of a big
Yeah.
deal in
Yeah.
every area for every age,
Yeah.
really.
So
Um,
why do we see the like what is the reason why so many people with Down syndrome have difficulties with speech clarity?
a lot of reasons,
Yeah.
mostly because they have multiple speech and language disorders and delays simultaneously
Mm,
from birth all the way through adulthood. And it's a really unique population parameter that way because we don't really see that. Usually it gets better on its own or it gets better as you get older. But the reasons I think that it remains so difficult is because it's really tied to cognition and social behavior and social communications in ways that we can't disconnect it. And so it's not only cognition in terms of how you think and what you remember and holding information for short amounts of time to be able to enjoy a conversation, but also just the anatomy and physiology of Down syndrome makes it automatically more difficult to understand. And I
mm,
think that in really teaching people and looking at little kids is a lot of us will, because we don't know very much, we'll do, okay, well, it must be the sounds, individual sounds they're saying, if we can fix those, if they're saying them wrong. And what I've learned from adults is that really isn't what's going on. That's not the thing that's actually making speech sound more difficult. But the anatomy of having a smaller upper jaw, right? So that
hmm
palate that's really kind of narrow and high, that's
hmm
going to impede our nasal passages. It's going to make our ears kind of smaller, windier, flatter, right? So we have a lot of hearing loss going on intermittently throughout life. Sometimes we don't even know it's there. So immediately, if you're hearing things like you're underwater, you're probably going to say things as though you're underwater.
hmm
And so really, we've always tackled that hearing thing pretty well, but I still run into it where I'm like, gosh, I don't think he's hearing. Well, he's
mm,
not sick. He doesn't have an ear infection. And so we have that plus, just that smaller nose, you immediately have resonance issues.
mm,
Low tone gives you immediate voice difficulties. So when just being self-taught, I read that people with Down syndrome, it takes them 2 to 3 times the effort to simply turn the voice on.
mm,
So to go from nothing to ah, because of that low tone and because they sensorily kind of don't feel it as well as we do, they tend to push a lot. And so you hear people talking or even little kids in classrooms and they kind of give it their all like, every time, right? And so, when they all their air goes into one word. And
yeah.
they push really hard. And so that can lead to voice differences, right? So maybe it's not just a language thing that they're saying one or two, words at a time and it kind of stays there until they're adults. But maybe that airflow piece, that kind of resonance piece, what they're hearing, that feedback from their own body to self-correct. Most of our kids don't self-correct. They kind of rely on us to do that for them. And so that's a whole huge area that, we have to kind of look at, like help them help themselves in terms of listening to themselves and kind of self-correcting, but that resonance piece and that voice piece is something we really haven't looked at.
Mm,
And so if you just have a cold, immediately, if you think you just kind of cut off your airway, just that alone affects speech clarity. And now
yeah.
you're going to add all of the other things where you might have certain sounds that are different. You might have certain things that you're doing, like leaving off the beginning or end of words. Um, these things we kind of tackle when they're young in single words and single sounds, but we don't learn to speak in single words. I mean, single sounds. We
hmm
usually learn whole words, whole phrases. Kids just pick it up and that's how we learn. So if we can kind of attack that ability to say more at a time, and we know why it's not happening, we can start to look at different techniques and different pieces of speech clarity that make it more difficult to be understood. And so, just from the get-go, hearing loss, kind of having that voice and resonance issue, just even low tone in terms of mouth breathing. So, if we have
hmm
things like sleep apnea, really can really affect eating and speech because that kind of
hmm
those drier membranes when you have a cold and you wake up and your throat hurts and you're kind of mumbling all the time. Well, we think that's kind of a steady state for a lot of our kids, that just kind
hmm
of drier, they're kind of in that open mouth, tongue forward position, because that's the
Yeah.
physiology and anatomy. We know now that we can really work on those things early, and at any time in life, but kind of looking at those things too. Are we looking at someone who's just having a lot of trouble when your mouth is really wide and you're talking versus like me, where my lips don't move very much, or
Hmm.
people with Down syndrome, everything's kind of more exaggerated.
Yeah.
And so when we combine all of those things, along with executive functioning issues and short-term memory and um, language, cognition, social effects, it all kind of snowballs into something that we've just not handled well, because you learn as you age, and we've always known that they know so much more than they can tell us, right? But
Yeah.
I think we've been attacking it the wrong way. I think that we haven't been looking at speech and how speech actually affects language use,
Yeah.
even as early as 3 to 6 months old. We're getting some new information through early intervention studies. Sue Buckley is doing a lot of that. She just had her international conference, and even there, I go and I listen, and it's just all the research that's coming in is kind of exciting.
Hmm.
Um, what can we do? How important is speech early on? Because most parents would tell me initially, when I would ask them, "What do you want?" They would say, "I want to understand what he says. I want my child to
Hmm.
talk. I want
Hmm.
other people to know how smart he is. I want other people to know how funny he is."
Hmm.
And that's kind of in the beginning where I was like, "Oh, well, okay, then let's do that. How can we make this person a better speaker so they can actually tell us what they know?"
Yeah.
And that's kind of back to your original statement, is we don't think they know much. And really, when
Hmm.
you uncover that speech clarity and you kind of can get through that part,
Yeah.
then it opens up. And almost every single time, me or students or families are like, "Whoa, we didn't
Yeah.
know we knew that," right?
Huh. Well,
We
let's
didn't
think of,
know.
I mean, I think yeah, you've been highlighting it, and we've been talking about it the whole podcast that, people with Down syndrome will be underestimated if their speech clarity is not where it could be. And I think a lot of people can sometimes just feel resigned to the fact that, okay, well, that's just how it's always going to be for them. But I wanted to kind of get your thoughts in terms of different techniques that you've come across in your career, things that can help with speech clarity in a child and also in an adult. What are some things that you'll put into play?
Yes. So if we think about a typical 2-year-old, and we think about a 2-year-old with Down syndrome, and we think about how much they might talk in one day,
Hmm.
and we compare those two, the child without Down syndrome is talking a lot.
Hmm.
They may not be understood very well, but they are, they have certain words, but they're constantly practicing, they're constantly talking. Our 2-year-old with Down syndrome is not. And
Hmm.
there's a lot of kind of reasons that are really kind of big umbrella reasons for that. But that, I believe, is the beginning. If you don't practice speech, you're not going to have good speech.
Hmm.
But we're not practicing speech. SLPs are not practicing speech. They think they have to break it into sounds, or they think that we have to rely only on sign language or devices so that they can so other people can understand that better and not them. And the
Hmm.
problem there is, when you're little, is that we learn language in those developmental windows really early. And if we're not going to help children with Down syndrome get closer to those things when they should, or when typical development does, they'll never have the practice that they need going forward. And so sometimes we come to that speech practice realization when they're older. And if you've
Hmm.
ever learned another language, that's harder as we get older. It's not impossible. You can. Um, but in looking at that, how can we get speech clarity to be better? Really, the only answer on the planet is that we have to practice speaking.
Okay.
And I think when with all the advocacy efforts that are out there right now, looking at people that are in movies, in commercials, we're really seeing adults on Capitol Hill right now giving these wonderful speeches, and we're
Mhm.
listening to them when we understand them. I think a lot of us think that they're exceptional. Oh, well, that's him, right? He got
Mhm.
lucky. He just was better at that, or whatever the reason we might give to that. But really, the answer is, what do actors do to prepare for roles?
Mhm.
They practice talking all the
Yeah.
time, just like
Mhm.
you and I. And I think that's also why people with Down syndrome don't self-correct. It's because they haven't spent a lot of time talking to even get to the point that that would naturally happen. So
Yeah.
if we know that, we know they have speech and language disorders and delays, throughout life and more than just one, and we know how they can change because we know more and more through research. What are some ways that we can help them with that speech clarity, taking all of those things into account? And so that's really what I've been kind of focusing on, is that really we just need to talk more.
Hmm.
And we also have fluency that comes in. So we have a lot of stuttering that's coming in with our older kids. We have it with the little ones, but usually in teen and adult years, that's also coming into play. And so really there's just so much going on right there. So my rule is we need to find techniques that hit multiple targets, right? Because there's no way in 1 hour a week that I can help anyone have
Hmm.
better speech clarity ever. And we know that dosage, some of the information coming out on dosage through research is pretty scary in terms of they're not getting nearly enough therapy to be effective.
Hmm.
So, I mean, there's some people in Ireland who I've read, and it really kind of scares you, or it scared me. And then now we have a population that, for the first time, in very large numbers, they're going to outlive their parents.
Hmm.
And this is really exciting from a medical standpoint and from an advocacy standpoint, but they're not ready. And so
Hmm.
when I first started hearing those numbers, I kind of panicked. And I think that's where I started to look more at teens and adults, is because they need to get a job. They need to have independent living skills because that's going to be what they need. And so instead of looking at, okay, how can we fix this? We need to look at what are they going to need in high school? What are they going to need when they graduate? What are they going to need when they want a job, go to college, live alone, get married? What are those things? And if we assume that those are going to be there, then we have to prepare them to have communication, because there really is no more important skill to independence than speech clarity. The
Hmm.
ability to communicate is number one. We just haven't
Hmm.
spent a lot of time there.
Hmm.
And so if we need to tackle all these things fairly quickly and all at once, some of the ones that we've been using, I've spoken about this at the Down Syndrome Medical Interest Group and at
Hmm.
NDSC conferences.
Hmm.
But currently, kind of one of the more recent things I found in about 2018, I think, is something called LSVT Loud, which is a Lee Silverman voice treatment that SLPs have been using with people with Parkinson's disease for a very long time.
Hmm.
Um, and it's a voice program that is extremely simple in its application, but it's also intensive. And so we know from other areas, especially feeding for people with Down syndrome, is that intensive therapies, so a lot at once, and then you kind of go back to a regular schedule, works really well. And
Hmm.
it gives us that intense speech practice that we need. But what it also does is that they were seeing what was going on in Parkinson's. And so they started applying it to other populations. And of course, it was working really well. And so I kind of stopped them for a while before it kind of came out like, hey, how about pediatrics? How about Down syndrome? Because of
Yeah.
there's so many things that were so similar for me. And when they did start doing some of the pediatric research and they came out with a program, I got trained. And then I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. This is that piece that I've been, it's not everything, but it was
Yeah.
really that piece that tackled voice, resonance, and all of the different things while also keeping it fairly simple. Because a lot of the times we know with executive functioning and short-term verbal memory being poor, remembering a lot of information to hear your question, think of the answer, plan out all those tiny motor movements, remembering what your question was again, remembering what my answer was again, planning it again, and then doing it.
Yeah.
It's a really huge process. So we need something simpler. And so
Hmm.
it kind of starts with just being able to hold sound, which is not easy for some, right? Just ah, and then doing that louder.
Yeah.
And so it goes from that awe state, and then you're going to mess around with a little bit of pitch change. You're going to move into words, and you're going to move into phrases, and you're going to practice those words 10 times, 10
Hmm.
times, 10 times, 10 times. And then the phrases over and over and over. And we pick more phrases that are pertinent to them for their name. Where do they go to school? What job do they want? How old are they? The questions that people typically ask, or
Hmm.
things that parents or caregivers or employers want them to work on. And we give them over 16 sessions, 1 hour each, straight, so about a month. Um, in high repetition, what I started noticing was it was working. They
Hmm.
became more aware of themselves. The high repetition, we thought, oh gosh, this is really boring. I mean, like nobody's going to want to do this. And an hour. Can we even do this with pediatrics? This is a lot.
Hmm.
What we found was they love it
Hmm.
because they know what's coming next. They know exactly what they have to do and how many times they have to do it. And it gets easier through those 16 sessions. And with those, which simply by speaking louder, so they have two cues, use your loud voice or say it like I do. Just using your loud voice tackles voice, resonance, articulation, phonology, motor speech, apraxia, fluency, all at once because you cannot do those things.
Yeah.
It's incompatible with poor speech.
Mm.
So if you simply yell, and I tell people to do it, do it in your car or in the bathroom or basement, wherever, um, you slow down. So if I just say Jennifer, that might be how I normally say my name, but then I have to say it louder.
Mm-hmm.
Jennifer
Mm.
to someone across the room, not screaming. But
Mm-hmm.
in that loudness, what happened? I had to slow down because you can't yell fast.
Mm.
My articulation immediately becomes clear.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have to think about these things. It just happens.
Mm.
And now, if I know I can hold that and I can do that, what we found was even those that we picked certain things to say, it started to affect things that we didn't practice. And they just started kind of popping up. And like, whoa, what was that? And then we think, that neuroplasticity, the brain, anyone who's had brain trauma or things like that, we know we can get it back. The brain can be changed, but only through practice. A muscle
Mm-hmm.
can only change through repetition of doing that motion. And so sometimes we don't even have muscle memory for
Mm-hmm.
speech, really, because we haven't done it that much. But what it did too, or does too, is now they have confidence for the first time, maybe that I can say that.
Mm.
And I can say that and I can see people understand me. Maybe I'm going to have more pride and confidence in my communication to do it in other places as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
that was one of the things. Knowing that their strengths, when I learned about strength, all we read about is what they're not good at. Parents
Mm.
know this intensely. Everything you read is terrible. Um, but when I learned what we were good at, and I learned about some of Deborah Fiedler's work in terms of phenotypes, it really kind of opened my eyes. Like, oh, okay, they're really good at visual learning. How
Mm-hmm.
can we turn speech into something visual? Which is
Mm-hmm.
what we were doing with a lot of the AAC stuff. So sign language, pictures, devices, you could see it, right? And
Mm-hmm.
immediately that worked. And then, so in addition to the LSVT being one of those techniques that we use, reading and Sue Buckley's research, and then other reading programs from Canada and other parent programs for reading. Well, it's visual. And all of a sudden, when I learned that very young children with Down syndrome can learn to read much earlier than our typical
Mm-hmm.
population, sometimes even self-taught. And I have some fun stories about that where we just realize they're already doing it.
Mm.
Through reading, it also did the same thing. It took away that difficulty with trying to kind of plan everything at once to say something because it's written. And so
Okay.
I have little kids that say one or two words at a time, but if they can read, suddenly we can practice sentences
Mm-hmm.
almost immediately. And then there's a couple more, but in that same kind of idea of voice, what do they also love? They love music, right? We hear that all the time. We have dance parties all the time. It
Oh
really is,
yeah.
it's a huge part of their life forever. And so I was like, well, what are some things that we use that are kind of music like? And this is where originally I was stuttering, and fluency was my passion before Down syndrome. And
Mm.
that's kind of come full circle for me. And that's the idea of doing something that interrupts that fluency is going to be possible rather than remembering when I have disfluency, I have to do something. And so if we can have a way of speaking that doesn't allow those things to interfere, just keeping the voice going, we call it melodic intonation therapy, right? So we know that people that sing don't stutter.
Mm-hmm.
Why? You can't sing when you stutter because stuttering is stopping and starting the voice over and
Mm.
over rapidly. And so if we can even use a little speech kind of like this and keep our voices going, we
Mm.
suddenly can also kind of bring that love of music in. And little kids, it's kind of fun to do because when I start talking like that, they kind of perk up and they
Huh.
notice
Uh-huh.
because that sounds a little like singing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then some of the research on voice as I was doing that said that most people with Down syndrome will never learn to sing
Mm.
And I was like, that's terrible. That can't be. They love music and they're singing all the time, but they're not really singing. They're kind of throwing words in because music tends to be fast, right? Um, they love it. So how can we get that there? How can we see people sing? And so every time I see someone, there was one, I think just recently this week that I posted on Instagram of a young lady singing beautifully. And
Mm.
again, this is possible. This isn't an anomaly. She's
Hmm.
not different. She just liked it. And somehow she was able to do it through, who knows, maybe therapy, maybe her mom, who knows. But if we know what those things are and we practice them over and over again, and we know what they're good at and what they like, and we make it
Hmm.
meaningful, because if it's not meaningful, they're out, right? It
Hmm.
has to be what they're interested in. So we have to tailor everything, which is easy. Teletherapy actually is really something that works well for them because right now I'm not thinking about really anything else except for this conversation and what I'm seeing on the screen.
Hmm.
So teletherapy works really well. And another visual medium that I use a lot is video modeling. Watching someone else or yourself do something well,
Mm.
the research found you're more likely to do that thing again well over and over and over because you remember kind of what it also looked like and not just what it sounded like or what you had to remember. And so I'll tell parents to record, if you catch them doing something really awesome, record it, show it back.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that piece right there gives them immediate feedback, confidence. They love it. Every child loves looking at their own pictures. It's why AAC works really well because they can see it. But looking at, okay, watching the whole act and not breaking it up, they're more likely to do that. And so we see it in things like feeding. I think Copy Kids is a program for eating that really, when I first saw it, it's been around for a while now. Um, it's just a series of children eating raw fruits and vegetables. There's no plot, there's no story. They'll just hand kids food and they eat it. Like a piece of broccoli, a head of broccoli, and they eat it and they're kind of giggling and talking, and it's just these videos.
Mm.
So I started thinking, oh gosh, I wonder what would someone with Down syndrome who has severe food aversions do with this?
Mm.
So we'd watch the video, we'd have mom put the food there, but they're like red peppers, I think was the first one that I could still see clear as day. The child ate the red pepper for the very first time because a kid on a screen ate the red pepper.
Wow. Okay.
Um, and so that I guess that was like 4 or 5 different techniques
Yeah,
that
no, that's really
we can
helpful. And
use.
so you would apply that same idea of a video modeling for speech related things. That's really impressive. Yeah, it's I think one of those things that as you highlighted that's so important for us is to remember that our friends with Down syndrome, they tend to learn really well with the visual cues and using that in a way to help them with speech. Yeah, that's a really great idea. I love that.
And then we combine it all into one, and we
Yeah.
can use a book that has their own personal pictures in it,
Yeah.
or a recording that has them, and then we can practice those things again and again and again. So technology really has benefited this group, I think,
Yeah.
in just everyday technology, not
Hmm.
necessarily the old kind of clunky computer picture, stick figure type communication, but real life and
Hmm.
really learning and watching them respond to it,
Yeah.
and seeing it finally click in a way that maybe they didn't know before. Even TikTok.
Yeah.
One of my colleagues is using TikTok for cooking videos or teaching someone else how to do something really well, allowing them to be the teacher and it being visual and that immediate feedback. There's so many neat teens and adults on TikTok doing just that that we could use in therapy.
Yeah.
And it's been, I would say the last 10 years is really just, this is going to get exciting. I think that we're finally going to make some of these breakthroughs so that people with Down syndrome can become parts of society because they can
Yeah.
speak better. And now that we have ways to do that.
Is this something that you think that a speech therapist just out in the community would be very familiar with, or is this something where the family may benefit from saying, "Are you familiar with techniques that work with people with Down syndrome?" How would you ask the family to approach that?
That's so hard.
Yeah.
There's like 10 of us. It
Okay.
feels like there's like 10 of us in the world, but yes.
Yeah.
And I think that that's why I really, in the last 5 years, I've kind of focused on that teaching other therapists because that's the
Hmm.
other problem is that a therapist in the schools where most people with Down syndrome
Yeah.
get from the schools, and that's going to be interesting with the things going on right now, and we're kind of
Yeah.
worried about it, right?
Oh, sure.
Um, but that therapist has 80 kids on their caseload.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no colleges I'm aware of that even teach a course on Down syndrome, right?
Mm.
It's the number one genetic
Yeah.
um, symptom or
Condition. Yeah.
syndrome
Mm-hmm.
condition,
Yeah.
and probably the least researched. I mean, you know this from what we're learning in medicine, right? In
Mm-hmm. Oh,
science, which is,
sure.
and that's the other piece, knowing some of those things can help
Yeah.
speech, right? Because everything's connected. But
Mm-hmm.
um, therapists don't know what to do. They don't even know that there is something else to do. So what are they going to do? They're going to do what they know. They're going to apply techniques from the general population of delays and,
Mm-hmm.
just kind of run-of-the-mill speech and language. So they use these sound-based things. We're going to work on this letter, and then it doesn't work, right? Because they don't really know.
Yeah.
And so we have also hurt ourselves in my profession because parents quickly realize that all these things are being told didn't work, right?
Mm-hmm.
It didn't work enough. And we know why. It just wasn't practicing enough. Therapists don't have the background to know when to apply or why something isn't working, right?
Mm-hmm.
Behavior, that piece in schools really stops everything.
Mm-hmm.
And in those behavioral phenotypes that Deborah Fiddler talks about too, that was exciting because we tend to think, oh, well, we have to make this super simple and kind of non-meaningful for them because this is really tough and they're getting frustrated and that's why they're having these behaviors. I've
Mm-hmm.
really never seen that to be the case. I think we're frustrated. I think they're not. I mean, if you've ever spent any time with a young child with Down syndrome, if you can't understand them and they get what they want anyway, that's like a win,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, this is tough for them.
Yeah.
And so they are capable of doing it. And they can, we just need to know. And if you don't know, you can't. And so
Mm-hmm.
we're finally seeing some of those programs kind of come out that this is what you can do with someone with Down syndrome at this age or in this setting.
Yeah.
And now kind of looking at maybe we're going to have to think more about speech and language services outside of schools. If that comes to pass, which should be happening anyway, but that dosage piece
Mm-hmm.
is there's no one therapist that can tackle everything. It's just impossible. Anywhere from oral motor and feeding to behavior to speech to language to fluency, all the things we've talked about.
Yeah.
You can't address that with one therapist, and you can't address it in 20 minutes
Yeah. Right.
once a week in a group at
Mm-hmm.
school.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's kind of what I've been trying to focus a little bit more on is yes, look for somebody that knows anything about Down syndrome. And then what I've done is I started, in addition to classes and things like this, is consults because we can't treat in other states that we're not licensed in. And
Mm-hmm.
so through teletherapy, I've been able to do a lot more consulting with parents, so
Mm-hmm.
individual parents with their child, bringing in their therapist so that they can kind of hear it.
Yeah.
With the LSVT program, people can get this is a program just for therapists to get trained. So therapists can get that training and then apply it to their Down syndrome
Yeah.
cases, or if they want to work with more people with Down syndrome, but just didn't, they're not sure what to do. They haven't figured it out yet. And so trying to get those types of mediums so that we can learn
Mm-hmm.
more about what works and show more people what's possible.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. This has
Thank
been
you.
really, really helpful for me to think about how the different techniques that can be applied to help someone with Down syndrome with their speech clarity. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course. Thank you. I love
Yeah.
this.
Oh, great. And to our listeners, I hope you loved it as well. If you have any topics that you'd like us to cover on future podcasts, you can go to send me an email at downsyndromecenter@chp.edu. And if you'd like to join us in the work that we do here at the center, including this podcast, please go to givetochildrens.org/Down Syndrome Center. But until next time, bye-bye.